Thank you. Sorry about that, Rachel.
No. Perfect. Perfect. Um, Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Welcome to the Camp Ben Frankel community and the greater Jewish community. We're so happy to have you here tonight. My name is Rachel Gross. I was Rachel Friedberg when I went to Camp Ben Frankel. I am currently on the board and I am the development chair. When I went to Camp Ben Frankel, I grew up in Normal, Illinois, and what makes Camp Ben Frankel unique is it draws from a lot of kids from small towns, like me, and we didn't grow up with a lot of Jewish kids. We encountered a lot of anti-Semitism growing up, and Camp Ben Frankel, at least for me, was one of the first times that I was able to be in a large community of other Jews. I was able to feel safe with my identity, to celebrate my Judaism, and to make really long-lasting friendships that have carried me through my life. So it's a really special place to many of us, and for anyone who went to camp, I know you understand that feeling that you get from camp. Um, I want to say that everyone is, throughout the course of the evening, if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat, and then we will address them when we have time. Um, and just to give a lay of the land, we have a panel of speakers, and we have some voices from the Camp Ben Frankel community, but we are going to start by introducing Kira Simon. She is the Associate Vice President of Campus Anti-Semitism Solutions at Hillel International. Thank you so much for being here, Kira.
Thank you so much for having me.
Um, could you just start by introducing yourself and telling us about your background?
Yes, absolutely. As Rachel said, I am the Associate Vice President of Campus Anti-Semitism Solutions. I've been at Hillel International, excuse me, since January, but my career as an educator, that's been my career for my entire adult life. So I started my career as an elementary school teacher, and did a lot of work focused on curriculum that helps students to make sense of social hierarchies. At the time, it was really focused on racism and anti-immigrant bias, which were really present for my students. Later, I came to work at ADL, where I served as the primary learning specialist and subject matter expert on anti-Semitism and general anti-bias learning practices. And I was there for about 7 years. And then just recently have taken this opportunity to work at Hillel International. And I am leading a new initiative that Hillel International is piloting, in which we have dedicated professionals in campuses that really need them, who are focused on addressing anti-Semitism as a system that is present on their campuses through relational education work and advocacy.
Terrific. Thank you. I'm going to start just kind of like with the basics of there's this interchangeability these days between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, and it's kind of confusing to differentiate what's happening between the two. How would you define each of them?
Yeah, great question. And it's in my nature as an educator, I'm going to start by establishing the premise that definitions are teaching tools. We construct them as humans so that we can make sense of concepts and make sure that we are talking about the same thing. So when I present a definition, it should be the beginning of a conversation, right? Not the end. And if any of you on this call have been in a conversation or read something that's saying this is anti-Semitism and this isn't, and this definition is right and this definition is wrong, you probably have a sense of why I'm setting us up this way. But anti-Semitism is a 3,000 plus year old systemic form of bias that targets the Jewish community. And we can define it in a lot of different ways. And I'm going to do that just to help build our understanding. When I'm talking to young people, or if I'm talking to elementary school educators, sometimes I use the analogy of the Dementor monster from the Harry Potter universe. If you're not familiar, the Dementor is a monster that changes shape to be whatever the beholder fears. And that's kind of how the Jewish caricature within the anti-Semitic ideology, that's kind of how that operates. people who hold anti-Semitic views and biases will perceive Jews, I'll put them in quotes because it's not real Jews, it's a distortion of Jews, to represent whatever it is they find wrong about the world. So, one of the ways that I often talk about anti-Semitism is that it's a mental habit. It's kind of a shortcut that our brains take to assume that Jewish people or Jewish entities are to blame, or it could be just a flattening of and generalizing of Jewish communities and Jewish entities. So even, say, positively framed stereotypes can be based on anti-Semitism. Um, some of you may be familiar, if you want to do a little more digging into this, with the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. It's a really lengthy text. I don't really use it in a classroom, but it's useful if you want to get a lot of examples of what anti-Semitism looks like. Now, pivoting over to anti-Zionism, we first just take the literal word. Anti-Zionism is an ideology that opposes Zionism. Now, it can be really confusing because we don't necessarily, as a global community, all have the same definition of what Zionism is. So I'll define that here as well. Zionism is the movement for self-determination of the Jewish people in our ancestral homeland of Israel. And so the anti-Zionism are movements and ideologies that oppose that movement. I think it's important to define both because something I've encountered in this work is that even when I'm talking to people who define themselves as being anti-Zionist, they don't always know what it is that means, which I think will come up as a theme as we continue talking.
Mm-hmm. Can you dig a little deeper into like not understanding what that means?
Yes, absolutely. So before I defined Zionism, and let's say in an everyday conversation or on social media, you might often see the term Zionism used without being defined. And it kind of presents this scary, mysterious concept. Anti-Semitism as a word also can present as a really scary, mysterious concept. And what's interesting is that the term anti-Semitism actually came into existence because somebody wanted, a German journalist wanted to affirm his anti-Jewish ideology and make it sound more scientific and academic, which is just such an interesting piece of history that I think really reflects a lot of what we experience today as the Jewish community. So likewise, the history of anti-Zionism began much longer before the state of Israel was established. It wasn't in opposition to the state of Israel. Anti-Zionism, we see it as early as the political Zionism movement of the late 19th century began. So even if anti-Zionism is kind of a mask for anti-Semitic ideologies, it's a politicized way of identifying Jewish entities, that is, say, the movement for Jews to live in the land of Israel in our own state, and assigning that as the role of the villain. Zionism is the reason that the world is not peaceful. Zionism is the reason that Palestinian people don't have self-determination. Zionism is the reason that the United States government isn't doing the things that we wanted to do. This is the habit, the mental habit that we see reflected in anti-Zionism. Um, now, I'll say I sometimes get the question of, well, they're not exactly the same. Like someone can be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. And while maybe in intent and belief, their views that Israel should not exist as a Jewish state may not come from a place of singling out Jewish people. It could come from a place of saying no states should exist, no group should have states, everybody should live in borderless societies. But in practice, any action taken on behalf of that ideology serves to isolate Jewish people, isolate Israel from the global community, and assign the totality of blame for any conflicts that Israel or Jewish people are involved in, assigning that blame onto Israel and onto Jewish people and Zionism.
Wow. Those are really good definitions. Thank you. I feel like you laid a lot of groundwork there for us in understanding that. And now I'm going to bring it into modern day times of since October 7th. So what has changed in anti-Semitism? And I'll stick with that right now. Since October 7th, what have you seen?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I'll start with almost nothing has changed in the patterns, but what has changed is the intensity and volume. And I'll go back to before for a little bit. So in my the last several years of my career, especially starting around May 2021, we started to see patterns of behavior. Especially among young people, especially on college campuses and on social media, of spreading disinformation about the conflict between Israel and Arab countries and Israel and the Palestinian people. We started to see a lot of activation and intensity added to what already was happening on college campuses around anti-Israel activity. So demonstrations that increasingly used the symbols, the language that we associate with anti-Semitic stereotypes. So like demonizing individual Jews, demonizing Jewish entities. All of these things were really present prior to October 7th. I think May 2021 was when I started to really see a spike in that on social media and college campus, but it started long before. And then on October 7th, we saw the permission structure of anti-Semitism change. That is the attack of Hamas on Israeli people and other people who are living in Israel. And then the subsequent response by the Israeli government gave permission to people who were angry about this conflict, who saw this conflict and thought it was really horrifying and wanted to do something about it. It gave them permission to say, it's Jewish people who are to blame. It's Jewish entities that are to blame. This conflict is not complicated. This conflict is simple. And the place that you should direct your anger on your campus or in your community is towards Jewish entities, people, and communities. And I borrow this language from the language of permission structure from Dara Horn, who in a lot of her writing does a really great job of outlining how this is how anti-Semitism has shown up for 3,000 years. That there is a ideology, a message that is communicated that says, hey, if you want to be a good person that is going to help make the world right and is going to solve the problems in the world, here is what you should do. You need to go after, target, isolate, and make vulnerable Jewish people and Jewish communities. Um, that liberatory language, that language of liberation, of saving the world, is very potent to people, right? It says, here's a way that you can be good. You can prove that you are on the right side of history. You defend people who need defending, and you are going to make the world a better place. And it says, here are the villains that you need to direct your anger, your activism towards.
Mm. Which goes along with all of the causes that seem to have kind of glommed on to this conflict right now. It seems like almost every liberal cause is connected to this, and it's almost confusing to understand kind of the origin, but this permission structure kind of really gives the groundwork for that.
Absolutely. And I can just describe an example
Please.
that I see a lot on social media. Maybe some of you have seen is you'll see graphics or you'll see people holding up posters that say like, Zionism is racism. Zionism is colonialism. Zionism is misogyny. Anti-Zionism is climate justice. Anti-Zionism is fighting for women's rights. Anti-Zionism is fighting for justice. And it's deliberately confusing because all of those terms that I just threw around, they're not defined in these social media posts. They're not defined on the posters. They're not even defined in the rhetoric, right? There's just an assumption that when I link these mysterious conceptual terms to each other, that people will accept that. And that's that's the mental habit piece, right? That's this conditioning that many of us, all of us really have been exposed to, that our brains are very ready to believe like, oh yeah, this mysterious thing I don't really understand, but you're telling me it's bad. Yep, I'm primed to believe that. And then the more I see it over and over and over again when I'm scrolling through my phone, or I am hearing it from professors in class and seeing it on posters when I walk around campus, the more my brain accepts that as fact.
You're putting language to all of the emotions that I feel like many of us have been feeling, and it really helps to process it all. So let's let's go back to the impact on our students.
Yeah.
And I know, especially with your ADL experience, you know more than college campuses. Like, what are you seeing anywhere from K to college, on the impact of on our students now?
Yeah, so I'll start with K-12, and I'm sourcing my data here from ADL's audit of anti-Semitic incidents. This was from 2023. So in 2023, we saw 1,162 incidents of anti-Semitism in K-12 schools across North America. The previous year, it was 495, so more than double. And the vast majority of them took place after October 7th. So that was just 2023. I don't even think they've released the 2024 numbers yet. I believe those are coming. Now, moving into the campus space. Prior to October 7th, so the school years from 2019 to 2023, the average, what we would typically see for the number of anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses, country nationwide, across the United States, about 200 to 300 incidents a year. That's about what we were looking at. 2023-2024 school year, over 1,800 incidents of anti-Semitism on college campuses. And then if we're comparing fall to fall to fall from 2022, 2023, and then this past fall, 2024, in fall of 2023, just 135 incidents. In the fall of 2020, I'm sorry, that was 2022. Fall of 2023, over 1,000 incidents. Fall of 2024, over 1,000 incidents. So it's a huge, huge increase in volume. And I prepared some links to some of these reports so that you all can look at them for yourself. But I also just want to highlight some of what students have responded to in surveys on college campuses about how this is impacting them. 83% have experienced anti-Semitism in some form. More than a quarter of them have experienced it from faculty, right? From professors on their campuses. 2/3 of campus students are not confident that their university can address these incidents and prevent these incidents effectively. And so we have students reporting that they're taking additional measures to secure their safety and their living spaces, that they are hiding their Jewish identity or their relationship to Israel, that they're withdrawing from activities on campus, and that they're scared to report these activities.
And who are they scared to report them to?
So that's a great question. So there's a lot of places where one can report these. And so every college campus is required to have some kind of bias reporting process that all students should be able to use. But there's varying levels of trust in those processes. And some of that is based on, perception of what is happening. And some of it is based on actual misjudgment and mishandling of these incidents, right? So there isn't always a recourse. There isn't always follow-up to students when these incidents are reported. And if the people who are in charge of reviewing those reports, the professionals, don't know what to look for, don't know how to identify anti-Semitism, then they cannot handle it properly. Now, I do also want to mention, and there is a link in what Sarah just shared, that is the Campus for All website, which is Hillel International and partners have developed this website to resource campus students, Jewish students on campus and their families, and how to address anti-Semitism, because we also have reporting metrics, and you can report your incidents of anti-Semitism directly to Hillel, and we will support you in addressing them.
And is Hillel also working with the universities to, collect all of this data so that you can address that as well?
Yes. Yeah. So if I can expand a little bit on the ways that Hillel is supporting campuses. So hopefully many of you already know this, that Hillel is the largest institution serving Jewish college students across the world, and that is really committed and redoubling on its mission to empower, enrich, and educate Jewish students so that they can have a really fulfilling college experience and become members of our Jewish community that are enriching all of us in their adulthood and future. But some specific areas of support that existed before October 7th and continue, and then I'll talk about what's been added since. So Hillel leads something called the Campus Climate Initiative, which is a program where we work directly with administrators to educate them on anti-Semitism, assess their campus, and create action plans so that they can make a difference in what is happening on their campus. So that's one way that we work with colleges and universities. We also have campus support directors at Hillel International that are kind of the backup and right-hand man of your executive director of a Hillel on each campus to make sure that they have everything they need to address what students are experiencing. And we have the Israel Action and Addressing Anti-Semitism program. That's the team that I'm a part of. It's existed before October 7th, and there's been really amazing professionals who have been tracking and responding to anti-Israel and anti-Semitic incidents that come up on campus. And then since October 7th, the initiative that I am leading has been added, where we're starting with right now just 15 campuses of adding a full-time staff member who is dedicated to addressing anti-Semitism by educating and advocating to the campus administration, and then also to directly serving students so that they know that there's an adult who is in their corner and will walk them through these processes of reporting, of seeing, their incident reports come to completion and a resolution, so that they don't have to do it on their own.
Yeah. How did you identify these 15 campuses?
So Hillel International tracks a ton of data from all of the Hillels across the country embedded in each campus and city, to assess what the needs are. How many incidents are we seeing? What are the nature of these incidents? So we looked at that data, or I say my colleagues before I arrived at Hillel looked at this data to identify which of these Hillels were most in need of support based on the volume and nature of the incidents we were seeing. And then also looking at each of these Hillels, did they have the capacity within their Hillel to add a new staff member who could really lift this burden off of the executive director and other professionals who are trying to manage all of these cases, all of these incidents? And those were the kind of how we narrowed down to that first 15 for this pilot. Really, we're really hoping that this is something that we can grow in the future, because there's a number of campuses that are asking for that additional support as well.
That's great. I want to bring it now back to the student,
Mhm.
because, there's a lot of things that happen that something is said to you and it doesn't feel right, but it's really hard to identify or articulate, or is it anti-Semitic or not? How do you help coach students to understand what anti-Semitism is and what they're receiving or experiencing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love how you set this up in thinking about, if I'm a young person and I'm just living my day-to-day life, there's a lot of things that could happen in a day that could make me uncomfortable and just bring up some negative feelings, right? And so sometimes it can be hard to source whether those are feelings of discomfort or if it's really a lack of safety and this is creating something that's a risk. So as an educator, as an adult who gets to work with young people, it's really important to approach these conversations with curiosity, right? Okay, so what happened here? What did this person say, or what did you see on that sign, or what was the discussion like in class, and how did it make you feel, and why do you think you felt that way? And then to offer and reflect back a little bit of information that is useful. So one of the ways that the kind of curiosity and reframing that I think is really helpful in these conversations is, instead of asking the question like, is it anti-Semitism or is it not anti-Semitism? Because that makes it a really black and white issue. It's one or the other, and there's not a lot of in between. Is let's get rid of that binary. It's not an either or. And instead of asking yes or no questions, let's ask how and why questions, right? How are patterns of anti-Semitism showing up in this conversation? What beliefs might be behind the behavior that we saw? And who is potentially at risk when, say, a piece of rhetoric or an image, who is at risk when we accept that these ideas, say about Zionism, about Israel, about Jewish people, who is at risk when we accept that they are true, and who is benefiting from it? These are kind of the curious questions that can help us to sharpen our lens about what is or isn't anti-Semitism. And I'll give an example. I think this is really common, is that I hear from people that say, well, anti-Semitism is being weaponized to say that all criticism of Israel is invalid. was like, wow, that would be really big news to all of the people who I know living in Israel who have plenty of criticisms about their government, their society, right? And that would be really big news to them. They'd be super surprised to hear that. But it's a question that comes up here in the US a lot. So one of the ways that I offer back to that is the question is not whether is my criticism anti-Semitic or not, but is anti-Semitism informing my focus on Israel? And so I ask myself that a lot. Like, am I forming this judgment about what I'm seeing in terms of this conflict based on the fact that I can't escape looking at this on social media? It's constantly in my face or it's constantly on the news. That there could be an anti-Semitic element to that, right? Why is this conflict getting much more attention than other conflicts? That's a question that I have to ask myself. Or I can be curious about, okay, is this criticism based on a policy, a rhetoric that's coming from a political leader, based on a military tactic? Is it something that I could levy a similar criticism to any other nation? Or am I singling out demonizing or applying a double standard to Israel that I wouldn't apply or haven't applied to any other country that I've read about or consumed news about? So these are some of the questions that we can ask ourselves. And I use myself as an example because just because I'm Jewish doesn't mean that I am not immune to absorbing these anti-Semitic patterns. So I have to check myself for them all the time too.
That's so interesting. It is. There's so much that we're exposed to all the time that you're constantly questioning what you believe and where you come from and things that you took it for that you would took for granted for so long. It really is shaping that. What do you, when you are working with students and you're asking them questions, what recommendations do you have for them? How do they handle these situations? What are like 3 things that we can help our kids do to prepare for these anti-Semitic incidents?
So I'll give kind of like a broader answer, and then I'll go into like some 3 specific things. I think it's really important to be validating to young people about what they're experiencing and what feelings come up because of it, right? Our emotional responses to the world around us are valid and deserve attention and care. And that goes for young people as well as adults. So anyone on this call, you are deserving of that as well, right? These are scary times. It's stressful. We deserve to validate our young people and have our fears and concerns validated. At the same time, I think it's really important to remember that anti-Semitism is not about real Jews, right? Anti-Semitism is not something that is caused by Jewish actions or Jewish behaviors or the Jewish community. It is something that impacts us and it presents a distorted view about what Jewishness and Judaism and Jewish people are. So I really want everyone here, and I try to practice this as well, to remember that our Jewish identity is something that we have constructed as a community for thousands of years. And that is so much more powerful and enriching and complicated than a distorted view of Jews that's presented in anti-Semitic ideology could ever hope to capture. So I think my first big tip is always with working with young people is really build that sense of Jewish identity and practice and community that in a way that is independent from anti-Semitism, right? Our Jewishness is complicated, it's joyful, and it can be painful, and it can sometimes be inconvenient, and it can also be really meaningful and nourishing. And all of those things get to live within us and within our community. So that's my tip number 1. I think my second tip is to, as an adult, like we can be engaging in our own learning practices about anti-Semitism, and it can be really healing, right? It can help us to learn that separation from the distortion of Jewish identity from our own sense of Jewishness. So if that isn't something that's already part of your practice to learn about anti-Semitism and reflect and share about your experience with anti-Semitism, I really encourage you to do that in a circle of trusted adults. So that way, and this goes to step 3, is when young people come to us as adults with what they are experiencing, we can hold space for them and let them have their process without potentially bringing some of our past traumas, our wishes, our desires of what should or shouldn't happen and bringing that to our young people. Let's let them bring to us their complicated relationships with Jewishness, with Israel, with all of these issues, and hold space to let them have whatever emotions come up and then address them together.
Mm. That's advice for pretty much anything that happens with our children, isn't it?
Yeah.
Try to take out our own trauma.
I mean, it's something I always have to be aware of in this work. And actually, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and add a fourth, if that's okay.
Please, you can add as many as you want.
I'd say if get involved in your students or your young person's school or after school clubs, get involved before something happens because it makes it a lot easier to address once you already have some established relationships. So it's just a great thing to think about is where, we're starting to wind down the school year, not quite, but like then getting into summer and getting into the next school year. Having those trusting relationships makes it a lot easier to bring an issue like this to the table before it becomes an issue.
Mm-hmm. So are you saying actually like kind of the talking to the people who are running the clubs, like the teachers or and like what exactly are you saying? Like just create a relationship, talk about the fact you have a Jewish child in the group or that like I'm just trying to understand specifically what you're saying.
Absolutely. So I'll give an example of like, let's say I'm a fifth grade teacher. That was where I started my career, right? And a parent in the beginning of the year, we're getting to know the families. Come to that teacher and say, "Hey, I just want you to know, the Jewish holidays are coming up, so like we're gonna have some things going on, and I just want to make sure I mention that because this is a really tough time for the Jewish community right now, and I know it's possible that like some of that could impact my child's experience in school. Like they might bring things to you, and I just want to make sure that we have an open dialogue about this." And it's very forthcoming, right? And it may feel a little risky even to do, especially if you're not sure if the educator will be receptive. But starting with from that assumption of good intentions of you, classroom teacher, and me, parent, we are in this together, can hopefully broach the topic in a place that feels safer when there isn't already a conflict, so that potentially, let's say later in the year, if an incident happens, maybe it's student to student, maybe it's something that a teacher does or says, that there's already a start to the conversation to address it.
Mm-hmm. Well, it also sounds like you're planting the seed so that a teacher, again, depending on how the student presents, they may not recognize a student as a minority that feels like a minority. And you're planting the seeds of like identifying that. And maybe they might also be more reflective about the way they speak about things.
Absolutely, right? That might spark them to start their own learning.
Yeah, yeah. Um, I'm going to end with what's your view of the future and what can we look forward to? What are like actions that we can take to try to better society, try to kind of open up the dialogue ourselves?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think the phenomenon that is giving me the most hope right now is that there are so many people outside of the Jewish community as well who have been activated in the need to address anti-Semitism. And so last week, I was just at a conference with 100 college administrators from around the country who are part of our campus climate initiative. And these some of them are Jewish, but some of them are not. Right? They have lots of Jewish students on their campus, but that's not the majority of their campus. And I'm hearing these administrators talk about the impact that anti-Semitism has on the health of their institution and their desire to address it. Yes, for the Jewish community, but also for the greater health of higher education institutions to be places of free inquiry and where students of all identities can show up. And that makes me feel really hopeful. And the more that I think we as the Jewish community can equip ourselves and resource each other with a lens to recognize anti-Semitism and the language to talk about it in a way that is really clear and understandable, I think the more that we can move the needle and get allies in this work that we're doing, which will persist for a long time, but I think we're up for the challenge.
It's always been persisting, right?
Uh,
And along those
Rachel,
lines,
Rachel,
oh,
we do have a question in the chat, so
great.
when you're ready for that.
Okay, I want to ask one more question about the clergy on campus. Are they also part of like outside of Jewish clergy? Have they also been part of these conversations?
That's a great question. And of course, it does vary campus to campus. We have lots of campuses that have a religious character to their institution and others that don't. But that is actually a really big area of focus in our partnerships at Hillel, is partnering with clergy and other faith-based and religious-based affinity groups on campus. And so there's a lot of really great groundwork and relationship building, many that has already happened and predates October 7th, but also a lot that has happened since. So that, yeah, it's a really important network.
That's great. That does give me hope. That's really nice to hear. Stephanie, could you please share the question?
Yes, absolutely. From one of our webinar participants, can you suggest a Jewish preparation expectation guide for students starting at a new high school or college?
Absolutely. So I'm so glad you asked. And I believe Sarah dropped this in the chat already. The Campus for All website is a product that Hillel and our partners in this work have produced that is great for college students and also students who are looking ahead and making their plans for college, that has resources for how they can be prepared for how to address anti-Semitism if and when it comes up, and direct them towards resources when it does happen so that they can do reporting and to make sure that those incidents get addressed. So it includes all kinds of things like what are students' rights on campuses, and how can we be really equipped in knowing what protections can I expect and what are my rights to academic freedom as a student on campus, so that I can make sure I know the difference between what is, again, just discomfort that comes up with learning in a new environment versus what is unsafe and potentially harmful to my learning practice as a student. So definitely start there. And then I guess I'd be remiss if I didn't also plug that ADL has a really great number of education resources that are aimed towards high school, K-12, but definitely inclusive of high school. So there's some really great resources on there from the education department there that could be useful to a high school student.
Thank you,
Fantastic.
Sarah. I actually have another question that just came in. Does Hillel have a view about why anti-Semitism has become so visible and pernicious on college campuses?
It's a great question, and I don't want to pretend to speak for my entire organization because we've got hundreds of colleagues who have many different opinions. But I'll share what I've observed and what I'm really thinking about. So we have like a combination of factors, and I described earlier this kind of permission structure that then meets the geopolitical moment of the attacks and subsequent war following October 7th. That was very activating and is very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Let's add to that social media, which repeats information to us over and over and over again. And because it's most of the social media we use is based on algorithms, meaning it shows us what we engage with. Um, so those of us as we're consuming social media, it is in many ways a brainwashing device. And I mean, I'm saying that rather colloquially, so you don't need to quote me on this in an article or anything. But if I see the same message over and over and over again, maybe the first time I saw it, I wasn't sure if it was right and I didn't really know what it meant. But when my brain sees it repeated again and again and again, my brain starts to accept it as fact, right? This is something about our cognitive processes that is a tactic that helps us survive, right? And helps us learn what something really quickly, but it also can be really harmful when we're feeding our brains information that might not be accurate. So I think that's a second one. And then I'll offer a third, and maybe this is unusual coming from someone in my line of work, but I have a real great compassion for students who are young people who are consuming a lot of violence in our media. And they want to know how to address it, right? I think a lot of young people, a lot of people generally, we want to do good. We want to make a positive impact on the world. It's very much an inclination, especially when we're part of a community. So it has become really socially acceptable, and then in some places even socially required, to espouse certain views on Zionism in Israel based on that ideology that Jewish communities are the main barrier to peace or the main barrier to liberation. And so if I'm a young person and my primary goal in the world right now is to be socially accepted, and I am being told that I have to declare affiliation to this viewpoint in order to be socially accepted, that is a very, very hard thing to resist, right? And so that I think really describes the phenomenon as how I see it.
Amazing.
Thank you. Thank you. It is, especially for the younger generation. It's, and if you're starting at a new high school or a new college and you're, looking for your social circles. And I can imagine the pressure. Yeah. Yes. Any other questions, Stephanie? Just
No, I think we're gonna
Great.
wrap up here and move
Great.
on to our voices of the community. And if anybody has questions, please continue to put them in the chat. We do have time for a Q&A at the end after we've heard from everything. But Kira, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So now we have some members from the Camp and Frankel community who have their own personal stories to share. I'm going to start with Celia Rothenberg.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the wonderful and really informative introduction, Kira. It resonated with me significantly, as you're about to hear. So thanks to the Camp and Frankel people, and thanks to Kira and her team too. So I am in, as you can see here, oh gosh, in the slide, I am located in Hamilton, Ontario in Canada, where I'm a professor of Jewish studies in the Department of Religious Studies. So, and I've been here in Canada since the mid-90s, but I was a longtime Camp and Frankel camper and then counselor, and sent at least a couple of my kids there too. So tonight, I'll speak just very briefly, just a few minutes, I understand is the preferred length, so I'll try to keep it to the point. Not as a parent to a university student, although I have 3 of them of my own, but I'm really just speaking about my perspective as a university faculty person, albeit from the Canadian context, but I think we have quite a bit in common with our American counterparts. And I'm glad to follow Kira because I think she made so many really interesting and important points about how we can see and identify and figure out anti-Semitism as we run across it. I thought tonight I might just tell you a very brief anecdote about how anti-Semitism is often loud, always ugly, but it can also be actually silent and really hard to find, but just as pernicious as in its other forms. So of course, then it becomes particularly difficult to combat, to educate the perpetrators or to hold them accountable or both. But there you go. So here's my anecdote that I will share. So each year in my department, I organize a guest lecturer, usually from anywhere in the world, really, to speak on any topic of Jewish studies. Usually it's quite a well-known speaker, and it's a big event for us. It takes quite a lot of planning. They're usually expensive events, and I'm sure you may have planned something similar, but a lot goes into these events. And right in the week, 6-8 months before October 7, in our planning phase, as it happened, we invited a professor from one of the University of California campuses to speak to us, yes, on definitions of anti-Semitism and why it remains so incredibly complicated and difficult to achieve any kind of consensus on a sort of standardized definition of anti-Semitism. So this was a very exciting event, and a tremendous amount of planning went into it. By pure happenstance, the event was scheduled for about 2 weeks after October 7th. So October 7th, of course, came and went, and I came across my dean of my faculty just 3 or 4 days before the scheduled lecture on anti-Semitism was about to take place. And the dean pulled me aside and said, listen, cancel it. Cancel the lecture. And I was absolutely flabbergasted. I mean, this was just absolutely stunning request. And I almost couldn't grasp what he was saying to me as he said it. And he said basically something along the lines of, it's for the best. It's better for the Jewish students, the Jewish faculty, the Jewish community members. It's for your own good. You really need to cancel this so as to avoid any trouble. Nobody wants any trouble. I walked away from that conversation with my head spinning. This kind of upper level administrative sort of fingers in our particular little pie on campus is unheard of. And eventually we went back and forth quite a bit until fairly late in the night on email, and he agreed to allow me to move it online using a pre-registration that closed 24 hours prior to the event system. So there we were, canceled the speakers' travel plans, canceled many, many things, tried desperately to get the word out that we were moving the lecture to online. In the meantime, staff removed all of our posters from everywhere we had posted it. And it became a kind of like inner circle event if you were in the know. And we did what we could, of course, to get the word out. So, here I want to be very clear. I do not believe my dean to be an anti-Semite. I just don't. I've worked with him now for many years, and I think that he's a smart person and has good intentions. But here we have an event literally about anti-Semitism being canceled in its in-person format, public open event format, free to the public format, out of concern for our well-being, which is, of course, probably a mask for self-concern about whether or not they want the wrong or the right kind of exposure. At that very moment, just less than 2 weeks after October 7th. So as I recognize and absolutely believe that the priority with recognizing and combating anti-Semitism has to go towards all those anti-Semitic acts and actions and objects that are visible and powerful and loud, it's incredible how anti-Semitic effects can sort of roll off the back of what might be good intentions, and can also work to silence and really, forgive the hyperbole, but push almost underground Jewish communities and Jewish individuals and Jewish studies. So that is my anecdote that I have brought to the table, and that I shared originally with Aaron, and then he approached me and said, I think you might want to participate in our anti-Semitism workshop, because here's a lecture on anti-Semitism canceled out of concern for Jews, supposedly, and ultimately all about anti-Semitism. So.
Thank you for sharing that story. In your story, you used the word silent, silence, erasure. What has been your feeling on campus with your colleagues, with other Jewish students? How are you feeling that campus-wide?
Well, McMaster has a relatively small Jewish community, both in terms of its students and in terms of the city of Hamilton, Ontario, in which we're located. We're about an hour away from Toronto, which is, of course, a huge Jewish center. And University of Toronto has a huge Jewish studies program. So we're much smaller. We're always the sort of little cousin to University of Toronto in so many ways. We had an encampment, but they were, as encampment goes, at least compared to what the news showed me from the US, it was relatively moderated and well behaved. Campus, I think that overall we're a moderate location. I'm not really sure I can speak on behalf of all of our students, but I do know that, I consider it definitely to be part of my job to simply be there, be visible as a Jewish faculty person pursuing Jewish studies at the university, and that is what we do, and that we're not going to be deterred. sometimes it seems to involve some really distasteful negotiation, like begging to hold our yearly endowed lecture, begging to be allowed to run it, and having to settle for running it online. But we did run it, and it did take me very much by surprise, I'll be quite frank, and I'll be better prepared next time for such an affront. But I think that overall we have a pretty strong and healthy campus culture.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean there's not a lot of work to do.
Mhm. Mhm. And you and other Jewish students do feel safe on campus? Do you feel that the university is making efforts to ensure your safety?
You know, again, speaking from a Canadian context here, I really don't feel that we venture into the realm of the dangerous.
Mhm.
But of course, a lot of fellow Jewish studies professors out there beyond McMaster might argue that any form of silencing is the beginning of a very dangerous situation indeed. But physically and on a day-to-day basis, I think we are doing all right. A factor for which I'm told, also smacking of anti-Semitism, quite frankly, to be grateful for. So I am begrudgingly grateful for being safe on a campus I've worked on for nearly 22 years.
It's amazing what we don't take for granted anymore. Thank you, Celia, so much for sharing this story with us and your insights, and especially as a professor of religious studies. It's in your professional experience and in experiencing this type of situation, it's a lot. So thank you so much for sharing.
I think the message is send your kids to camp. All right, my pleasure. Thanks
Perfect.
very much.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, now I would like to introduce Roberta Rudolph Salas. She also went to Camp Ben Frankel, and she is going to talk about her experience. She's here in Chicago, so well, I'm here in Chicago too, not everyone is, but she's going to talk about her experience with Chicago Public Schools. Hi, thank you, Roberta.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'll preface this by saying that I grew up in a small town, and that's how I got to Camp Ben Frankel. And it was really an amazing experience. When I went there, it was really meant to be a place where kids could spend the summer with other Jewish kids and experience what it was like to live day to day with other Jewish kids, because I didn't. So moving to a big city, at one of the biggest cities in this country, Chicago, felt like a place where, wow, there must be lots of Jews here. And it will be great, when I raise my kids, that they won't go through what I did. They're going to be in this diverse city, and there's going to be lots of Jews here, and we're not going to feel, isolated at all. And we sent our children to Chicago Public Schools, neighborhood district-run schools, our neighborhood elementary school where we could walk, and neighborhood high schools. And as I went through the system, I realized how few Jews were in these schools, and that some of the same experiences that I had in school, where I was sort of like the only Jew and had to sort of explain what it was to be a Jew, and people didn't really have a lot of experience with that. My kids were having that experience, and I was a little bit surprised at that in the Chicago public schools. But I thought, okay, well, though, it's still in a diverse community, and so that experience will help them and provide for them what they don't have with other Jews. And I think for many years we sort of didn't really pay attention to it that much. We went to temple, and they went to religious school, and they went to camp, and so they did have a lot of other Jewish kids in that realm. They just didn't have it in the Chicago public school system. And then I thought, well, when they go on to high school, there'll be a more, maybe just my neighborhood. And when they go to a neighborhood high school with everybody in there will be more Jews. And I, again, was surprised at how few Jews were actually in the Chicago public school system. You know, as Kira suggested, getting involved in your school is a really great way when you have issues. And I have always been involved in my school in the Chicago public school system. When my kids went through it, the Board of Ed was appointed by the mayor. So, and it still half is. And each school had a local school council that is an elected body of parents and a couple teachers and community members. And we acted sort of as the board of directors for our little school. We hired the principals, we made budgeting decisions within the school, and it was for me a great way to feel like I had a say in my school. And yet I don't think that it really necessarily protected us from some of the things that happened. And to be honest, we didn't really realize it was happening until we looked back on it. And as Kira said, I think October 7th activated something in teachers and in parents and in kids that may have been in there but didn't well up, or they didn't have permission to do it until October 7th happened. And there was sort of this explosion of you know, intensity. And people felt suddenly the freedom to say things and do things that maybe they sort of kept quiet. But now, you know, everybody's sort of doing it. And, you know, and I have to say, as a parent, and I know there's a lot of parents listening, it's very easy for us to say we should we should do this, or how did we do this, or how did we do this? But looking back on it, I realized that my kids, and I think a lot of kids are this way, is that they're not looking for it, and they don't want to draw attention to themselves. They kind of want it to go away. And when things happen to them, they don't want to really bring it to their parents, because they don't want their parents going to school and yelling at their teacher or yelling at their principal. They want to fit in. They want to be one of everybody else. And if we start complaining about what's anti-Semitic or this might be wrong, it creates this feeling that they don't want to be. And particularly in elementary school, like, you know, stuff happens and you might not know about it, and then they'll kind of like say something and you're like, what was that? And but they don't look at it in that way. And then they get to high school and stuff happens, and really high school is a place where they're really like, I don't want to make waves. I just want to go to class. I just want people to, you know, I just want to get through this. I just want to get through the day. I don't want to know about this. But I think that October 7th, after that, things really, you know, started heating up. And now that my kids are in college, I think there's still a little bit that way, where they kind of just want to go to class, and they don't want to have to deal with that. They just want to go to class and learn and make friends. But a lot of this is in the way for them now, and they really can't get away from it.
Uh-huh.
So,
And what happened? What happened in high school to your son?
you know, well, it, I'll go to elementary school, and I'll say that I was very involved in Illinois. You have to have Holocaust training in the 7th or 8th grade. And I was very involved in that. I wanted to know what it was. My mom's a survivor, and I wanted to know what they were doing there. And I was kind of shocked at some of the books that they were offering them and the movies that they were asking them. And I was very involved in saying, my kid's not going to watch, you know, The Boy in the Striped Pajama, and I don't want my kid reading that book. Here are the books that I think would be better for them. So I was really involved in it that way. When they got into high school, oh, and then I also went to the Holocaust Museum with them, and I saw fooling around, but I didn't necessarily go, oh, look, that's anti-Semitic. I thought it was like, you know, 8th grade boys being dumb, you know. And when he got into high school, that's when he started to feel like people were making fun of, you know, doing anti-Semitic things that they had seen, like on social media, like throwing money at him or trying to grab his Jewish star, or, you know, just making comments to him that, and honestly, I can tell you some of the things that he told, that I found out about them, were way after the fact. It wasn't something that I could go to the school and and talk about it. And quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have even at the time. It was kids kind of doing that stuff, and I probably would have felt more like I would want him to do it. I don't want mom to go to the high school. It didn't seem to rise to that level, except when he found the swastikas etched in the bathroom. And that was when I was very specific with him about going in. He has to report that because they can't stay on the thing. And it took a couple days to bring them down. And I went to an LSC meeting and made sure that that was addressed, that that's out there in the world. But it is, it's really hard. And again, after October 7th, the Chicago Teachers Union has become very, very vocal in their support of the pro-Palestinian, the pro-Hamas movement. They cover it by saying that they're trying to support their students, their Palestinian students, but they make no mention of the Jewish students and protecting Jewish students. And there always was an undercurrent of it, particularly with the leadership. But after October 7th, it became even more vocal and just out there. They just felt the freedom to post things, the leadership. And I don't think that all teachers believe that, but enough of them have to have elected and keep electing this leadership
Yes, yes.
to keep them there and saying these things,
Thank
So
you. Thank you, Roberta. We're going to pause there. But thank you so much for sharing this perspective, especially living in Chicago. And I see one of the comments about the mayor and the teachers union and teachers asking kids to protest for, a March for Palestine. And Jewish kids are isolated and not if they don't want to participate in the protest, and teachers are encouraging
exactly.
them.
And
Yeah.
and we had a student teacher. This is just to finalize this. My son had a student teacher one day who came up to him and sort of whispered to him, "Aren't you afraid to wear that Jewish star?" And it was kind of like, "But aren't you afraid of that, And he goes, "Why?" And she said, "Well, I'm Jewish and I'm uncomfortable with it."
Mm.
And when the adults in the room are kind of saying that, you know that it's permeating in the teachers' lounge and in the whole group. So,
Yeah.
but thank you for having me and allowing me to speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Roberta. I really appreciate you sharing your story. Thank you. Okay, now I would like to introduce Cece Uban. And Cece, there is a tornado watch going on where she is. So hopefully she can make it through her story. She's down in Southern Illinois. So Cece, please welcome and please share your story with us as well. Thanks.
So, I will say we're a blended household here. I was always raised Catholic. I'm working on my conversion as we speak. And my husband was Jewish, met in high school sweethearts. We've stayed in the same small community. He was the only Jewish person in the schools when I went, the only one I ever knew until I started to meet everyone in the congregation. My kids are the only two Jewish students in the school district. So we've had a lot of subtle things. You talk about, she mentioned, be active, be involved. I'm the president of the PTA. Every year I have brought Hanukkah treats as soon as they start mentioning the holidays. So my kids don't feel left out. And I express the teacher, I don't want them to feel ostracized. I want them to celebrate who they are. I've always raised them that way. I've raised them to speak out when there's a problem. So I didn't quite have that same reaction. We've had a couple subtle issues. I will say growing up, third or fourth grade, I remember there being a KKK rally in the square in the next town over. Even as Catholic, my dad raised me to be very conscientious of that type of mindset. But I was also raised to be respectful. I was raised to respect other people's beliefs, no matter if I hate them or not, as long as they are decent human beings. But we had little things at school that have happened. I had a teacher refuse to give out, didn't want to give me a date for Hanukkah treats. Then she refused to give out half the treats I sent to school. So I got, $100 worth of donuts back. That was pretty nice. Then that same teacher that same year, my son told his psychologist that someone told him Hitler was right. I didn't know who, I didn't know when. You have to realize Micah's on the autism spectrum. He very rarely can put a face to a name unless he likes you. If he likes you, he'll learn your name, he'll talk to you. But, as soon as you hit something in Micah, he just basically blows you off. So these people, he didn't know who they were, even though they're in the same classroom. I didn't know when it happened. So how do you report it? So we didn't. Me and the psychologist kept talking. We kept a very open dialogue. That same summer, we had vandalism issues at our temple. We kept having windows getting broken. We had 3 windows broken in a month and a half. And they kept saying it was my husband with the mower hitting the windows with rocks until we had one big incident. And they broke out and did, I want to say, $13,000 worth of damage to stained glass windows, if not more. I really don't know the figure. It was every window we had some form of vandalism to it. They threw soap all over the floor. The police blew it off. They were like, oh, it was kids. They vandalized the park. And I'm like, you don't understand. This is the temple. They broke the windows. That's a big deal. Just saying, hey, we broke out the windows of a Jewish temple. In the end, they did find it. We had to contact the ADL to keep the police on top of it. I still have no idea whatever it came to fruition on that. And I hope, some kind of moment was learned if they are kids, because I do have a soft heart and I want them to learn their lesson, maybe realize what they did was really wrong. But the police ended up refusing to come to our temple anymore, even though we were in city limits, had city water. Part of our property was outside of city limits, so they did not come anymore because we had called them so much for the broken windows and they had a lot of bad PR. Couple months later, October 7th happened. And I told both of the teachers at the time, I'm like, look, my kids are upset. Miriam especially, she was 9 and it hit her like a rock, losing that counselor. It was awful for her. And she was very upset. I said, hey guys, if you read any Holocaust books, I need to know ahead of time. So that way I'm prepared for the reactions and I know what's going on. And I know all these teachers. It's a small town. I grew up with most of them. Well, that November, my son got cornered in a gymnasium. Apparently, one little boy told a small group of girls, and he was kind of trapped in a pack of kids, so it's not like he could leave the situation, to once again tell him Hitler was right, that he should not, basically insinuating he shouldn't be here. So Micah starts yelling about how awful and evil they are and what they did was so wrong. And his teacher was up receiving an award. She came back to a white-faced child who was shaking in rage. So she sat down with him, held his hand. She was like, I was going to talk to him as soon as we got out, what was going on. But as soon as they had left, another child approached him and said the same thing because they got such a big reaction out of my son. So we made a deal of it because that in itself is not going to fly. Micah has always had bullying issues. We've had physical altercations with kids who will shove him or kick him. A total different mindset than what I have with my little socialite of a daughter. But whether it was done because he is Jewish or autistic, either way was a hate crime.
Mm-hmm.
I lucked out with this because I got blown off for several days when I sent the email to the superintendent. They did nothing. That I sent my email Wednesday evening, nothing Thursday, nothing Friday. Obviously, they're not going to respond on the weekend. Monday, Pritzker announced that if you are not proactive, thorough, and he said a bunch of other words to make sure that all these school districts knew this was not going to fly. You will lose state funding if you do not fix these situations. He sent it to everybody. I have a friend who's part of the teachers union who passed it on to me. By 2:00 that day, I got an email back from the assistant superintendent. We had a meeting with him and my mother-in-law, and he was just like, well, I don't really know what to do. As I told him, that's not my problem, whether it was done for this or was done otherwise. We also brought it up in my son's 504 meeting. And I go, he needs to be protected. He needs to be watched 24/7. There is no more step on this kid's toes and push him. There's no more constantly yelling at him to shut up and be silent. This stops. Every bit of it. They had to do the anti-defamation league's class routine. And I feel like he would have even blown us off, except for my mother-in-law, who's one of the sweetest women ever, lost her cool with him in this meeting. And so eventually they catapulted. They did everything we wanted. They did special education awareness, making people aware of all the differences in some of the kids, even if you can't see it, because Micah is high functioning. You cannot tell he's autistic unless you know what to look for. But these are kids that I taught softball to. These are kids, one of them I grew up with their parents. These are kids I have brought Hanukkah treats to, at least almost all of them, and I only know 3 of their names because my son can't tell me the other ones. The amount of hurt it takes to know that they had heard that somewhere is insane, knowing these are people you grew up with.
Absolutely. Cece, I'm sorry to do this. In the interest of time, we're gonna end the story there. I'm so sorry for the pain that your children have experienced, that you have, the disappointment in your community, and the lack of safety from everywhere, from teachers to administrators to the police force. It's really just to hear this perspective of where you're living and what you're experiencing breaks all of our hearts. And I so appreciate you sharing this. And I'm so happy to hear that there was a higher authority, that the governor took action and the school had to respond. So it's nice that there is kind of a you saw change with that legislation, and it is encouraging. Thank you so much for sharing, and I hope you stay safe. And the tornado doesn't come. Thank you. Okay, now I am going to turn it over to our fearless leaders, Aaron and Sarah. Please share next steps for tonight. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Kira. Thanks, Roberta. Thanks, Celia. Thanks, Cece. Hi, everyone. I'm Aaron. I'm the director of Camp Anne Frankel. I'm the executive director of our Jewish Federation. And I'll keep this pretty brief. I first want to thank you for making time tonight, wherever you're joining us from, for something as important as this. And I also just want to connect some dots. I mean, we've just heard from so many different perspectives. I want to talk a little bit about Camp Anne Frankel and how we address and try to help and support kids through difficulties like being faced with anti-Semitism. One of the most important basic ways we do that is by creating a safe, welcoming, camp community by helping kids build relationships and friendships with each other, so that someone like Roberta or Celia or Rachel, who can grow up in a small Jewish community, that they can meet and befriend other Jewish kids and staff and create lifelong friendships and support systems, so that fast forward to today, you have a Jewish community that you can rely upon and connect with really forever. That's our aspiration. That's our vision for what Camp Anne Frankel should still be today, so that CC's kids, Micah and Miriam, and all the other kids in our community today, no matter where they're coming to camp from, so that they can have a safe, welcoming, inclusive Jewish community that they can turn to when they need it. That's what we do. That's what we do every day. Let me look at my notes. I'm supposed to do a little fundraising ask here. And in part because at camp, only about 50% of our costs are covered by the tuition that we bring in. The other 50% comes from fundraising. One of those things that we're fundraising for is an offshoot of tonight's discussion. I'll keep this brief, but I'll tell you that about a year ago, I got an email from a mom in the north of Israel saying that a rocket had landed in her neighborhood and she was scared for her daughters. And could they come to our summer camp? She couldn't afford anything but the flights, but is there some way that we could help her daughters? And I thought, my goodness, I'm sure there's a program for that. So much has been raised to support Israel. So I reached out to some contacts at different national programs and was surprised to find out that at that time there was nothing that her daughters could join. So we tried to fundraise some money to bring her daughters to camp. What started small ended up raising more than $130,000, and we were able to bring 18 Israeli kids who had been evacuated from their homes in the north and south of Israel to Camp Anne Frankel last summer. It was amazing. It was amazing for those kids because they had a safe summer. And it was amazing for the friends that they made, the American kids that they befriended. They have stayed in close touch all year because it's so easy to do today, unlike when I was a kid. And those 18 Israeli kids are all planning to return to camp this summer. They asked us, can we come back at the end of last summer? And I couldn't promise them anything because I didn't know if we would have the funds. Today, we're raising funds for that. And you can help us if you like. We've raised $87,000 in the last month. Our goal is $100,000. We're almost there. So any help that you can give us will help these kids who are still evacuated from their homes in Israel come back to Camp Anne Frankel. It'll help plant seeds and relationships between young American Jews and young Israeli Jews that will foster lifelong friendships. And that's one very profound, long-term way we can create strong relationships between American Jews and Israeli Jews, and therefore between America and Israel. So help us out. The link's in the chat. And I'm going to turn it over to Sarah in a moment. Yeah. There's Sarah. Because I'll give you a little preheat. Because in my role as the Federation exec, we're not just here for camp, we're also here to build and foster relationships with our broader community. And so Sarah's going to talk about ways that all of you can be involved, and we'd love for you to join. And so I'll turn it over to Sarah for that now. Thanks, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. So as Aaron said, we are starting a group that's really meant for all of you sorry, I'm gonna stop the sharing so I didn't talk to all of you. This is meant for all of you as adults raising Jewish children. Kira mentioned earlier that it's really important to find a circle of trusted adults to talk with about what's going on. So in that vein, we're starting an affinity group for parents, guardians, or other adults who are involved in raising Jewish children. The affinity group is going to be to discuss anti-Semitism in schools and with children. As you can tell just from our panelists tonight, there's so much going on in our community that we know is there to discuss, and we want all of you to be able to have that conversation with other members of our camp community. Every meeting of the affinity group, it'll be a virtual meeting. It will be a lightly facilitated discussion by myself or by Erin, and a place for participants to share their personal experiences, to ask for feedback on something going on, to get support, and just to build and have this supportive group of other people to talk with about raising children in a climate of, as we've heard tonight, fortunately, rising anti-Semitism. You do not have to be a parent or guardian of a Camp Ben Frankel camper yet. We'll get there. But really, please feel free to share this with anyone you know who is involved in raising Jewish children. I put the affinity group sign up link in the chat. Our first group is this coming Monday evening. And if you can't make it to that group, we will be having more groups in the future. In the follow-up email from this event, you'll get the link to sign up for that affinity group, and also my email, Erin's email, so you can email us if you're not able to come to this group, but you're interested in coming in groups in the future. So I'm really looking forward to having that discussion, hopefully with many of you soon. And I will turn it back over to you, Erin.
Actually, we're turning it back to Rachel.
That's good, because I was like, I don't know what I'm supposed to say.
Yeah. We're turning it
I
to Rachel for a little Q&A, and then we will wrap up in a few minutes.
So we would like to open it up now. If anyone has any questions, or if there's anything, any comments that you'd like to make, before I forget, I do want to encourage everyone, please share these resources that Kira has shared with us. I think they're so important. I think that the information sharing, now that everyone's been here tonight, you can now be a steward of information and sharing. We're also recording. We recorded the event tonight, so that if you want to forward this to anyone that you think could benefit from knowing this, Kira has so many words of wisdom and so much language that helps us share our perspective and what we're experiencing. Sometimes it's so emotional that it's really hard to engage in conversation and to either defend or protect, or even just to converse. So these resources that she shared and what she used tonight are so beneficial. Does anyone have any more questions that they'd like to ask now?
Rachel, we do have one question that just came to me. What are some words of hope? Kira, you know, we hear a lot of things that are, we've heard a lot of things that might feel a little scary tonight, and a lot of things that are draining emotionally, maybe for people along the way. What are some words of hope that you have seen through this process? Some things that can give us some feelings of being able to move through this storm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to thank you for having me to share this information. And it was really an honor also to listen to the stories of my fellow panelists, and to hear that they're sharing their stories. I think it's very important. Words of hope. So very often my work is facing other professionals and other administrators, but at the beginning of this month, I got to attend Hillel's Israel Summit, which is a convening of students. I was 500 plus students from colleges across the country who are leaders on their campus and are representing their relationships to Israel. And it was not just Jewish students in attendance. And I got to sit with these college students and hear them talk about the issues that they're addressing on campuses and the kind of climate that they're hoping to support, where people can share their differing opinions, where they can have beautiful and complicated relationships with the land and the state and the people of Israel, and then to get support from each other and find those points of connection. And that makes me feel really hopeful and really connected. And so showing up to spaces like this, showing up to the affinity group, which I think is a fantastic idea, find those points of connection, because we are so much stronger when we talk to each other, right? Not through slogans and not through emojis, but when we get to see each other's humanity and be in relationship. And so that is my wish and my hope for you all here going forward.
That is a beautiful sentiment. Thank you. Thank you. And I will also plug the movie October 8th. If anyone has the opportunity to see it, that also the stories that they highlighted of a lot of women, female students on campus, and the leadership they've shown and the strength they've shown, and talking about Jewish identity, it is an incredibly powerful movie. So thank you so much. Thank you, Kira. Thank you to all of our speakers tonight for bravely sharing your story, for all of our compassion, being here, listening to it, experiencing it. As much as sometimes you want to bury your head in the sand, it's really important to educate ourselves, arm ourselves, and to as Kira said, to be in community with others and expressing ourselves and our humanity. So thank you to everyone who is here tonight. And we are at 8:28. Boy, we're good on time. So thank you. And thank you for everyone in the comments too, and asking your questions and sharing your perceptions as well. It's it again feels so good to be in community. Thank you.